everyone, welcome back. I know the last video ended on a bit of a cliffhanger. I had to do that because there's so much involved with this study that I didn't want to throw too much at you right away, although you know I'm pretty good about doing that, and I will probably do that again today. I hope you had a chance to study out the book of Joel for yourself after the last video. There's so much involved with this book that I really just want to cover all the bases and really make this point clear because I think it's pretty profound. This study has actually now turned into a few videos because the Lord just keeps revealing more and more on this topic, and I'm pretty excited to share it. So we established in our first study on the book of Joel that there was a terrible destruction by these locusts, and now we can see in Joel 2 how God is bringing his destruction to destroy the destroyers and rescue the repentant remnant. So, who is this great army that God is going to send to help the remnant against their enemies? Let's keep studying it out. Let's first go over some of the verses that are describing this army again. Joel 2, verse 1. Blow a trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. Indeed, it is near. Verse 2. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, as dawn is spread over the mountains. So there is a great and mighty people. A dawn is referencing a break from this current darkness that has already spread over the earth. This new dawn is going to spread like brightness over the mountains. It means a dawning after misery. So this is how he is explaining this mighty group, and from how they're being described, they are the good guys. This dawn is a good sign for those that have returned to God, but it's a day of thick darkness and gloom for their oppressive enemies. Look at Jeremiah 13:16 when speaking to the remnant. It says, "Give glory to the Lord your God, before he brings darkness, and before your feet stumble on the mountains in the dark. And while you are hoping for light, he makes it into gloom and turns it into thick darkness." So let's continue with Joel 2, verse 3. A fire consumes before them, and behind them a flame devours. Let's pause here because this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the word used for fire in this verse. It means supernatural fire, God's anger, and it also means splendor and brightness, which reminded me of 2 Thessalonians 2:8. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. You'll see how the word for brightness here also means appearance. And what does Colossians 3:4 say? When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. And Romans 8:19 says this, "For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing or appearing of the sons of God." And we know from Joel 1 that the earth and creation were moaning and groaning from the destruction of these locusts at this time. But we are seeing a new group appearing on the stage in glory and brightness. And we now know they come with fire. Look at Exodus 34:17 when referencing the seventh day. "And to the eyes of the sons of Israel, the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop." Now we see his appearance or brightness is connected to this consuming fire. So it's just like the dawn that has spread over the mountains. This great army is this consuming fire. And if you've been tracking with me, you'll see that this is the raptured and glorified church that is appearing in the brightness of his glory. This is the new great army that God is sending to destroy the wicked, just like 2 Thessalonians 2:8 describes. Now continue on with Joel 2, verse 3. "The land is like the Garden of Eden before them, but a desolate wilderness behind them. and nothing at all escapes them. So the Garden of Eden, and now the entire land, was full of serpents at this time. Who is given specific power and authority to trample them down? That's right, the church. Let's scroll over to Luke 10 for a second. We'll be looking at verses 17 through 19. Now the 72 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said to them, I watched Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Behold, I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions, and authority over all the power of the enemy, and nothing will injure you. So think of the Revelation 9 locusts that have power as the scorpions. So like the last video mentioned, I believe Satan is the angel that was given this key and power to open the abyss to let Apollyon and his locusts out. That's why the raptured church is given this specific power and authority over these locust scorpions. This verse is clearly talking to the church who will be coming back to stomp out these wicked locusts. Remember Romans 13 from the last video. The church is given this spiritual authority. They are the avengers that have been sent to execute wrath on God's enemies. So let's go over those verses again. Romans 13, 3 through 4. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. So from these same rulers. This is not talking about the enemy, because you know that the enemy isn't going to give you praise for doing what's good. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger, to execute wrath on him who practices evil. That's powerful stuff, you guys. No more of this lukewarm church biz. The church is given great power and authority to execute wrath on God's enemies. And the church needs to be preparing for battle. It is time to start judging with righteous judgment and strengthening our discernment. Separate yourself unto the Lord. This is why it is so important for the church to be studying Bible prophecy, because Bible prophecy is meant to prepare us for our roles in the coming future of his kingdom. So back to Joel 2, verse 4. Their appearance is like the appearance of horses, and like war horses, so they run. Well, that's interesting because it also sounds like the Revelation 9 locusts. But let's read Revelation 19, verses 11 through 15 to clear something up. Verse 11. And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he judges and wages war. His eyes are a flame of fire, and on his head are many crowns. And he has a name written on him which no one knows except himself. He is clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. And he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. The church will be doing this treading with him. They are waging war with a flame of fire. This is the righteous army in heaven, the raptured church. Now compare this more with our Joel 2 army in verse 5. With a noise or thunderings as of chariots, because the church is on their horses, they leap about on the tops of the mountains, like the crackling of a flame of fire consuming the stubble, like a mighty people drawn up and arranged for battle. All right, let's do a little word study here to confirm who these mighty people are. The word leap means to dance with joy. And get this, it means to trample the ground with one's feet. So we can see this great army trampling on the mountains. And if that doesn't prove it, I don't know what will, but I'll keep showing you. The word for mighty means numerous, strong in number, countless. So this had me thinking about the great multitude saved from the Great Tribulation, which is the second half of Daniel's 70th week, which is the church at their mid-trib rapture. And if you remember from Revelation 9:7, this great multitude could not be counted because there were so many of them. They were strong in number. This is the great white harvest, the main harvest. Mighty also means the strong, heroes, once powerful members of a lion. So interesting again, because this also sounds similar to the Revelation 9 locust. So this can be confusing when you're studying it out, but we have to remember that God likes to work in patterns, and he makes a mockery of his enemies. For example, let's look at Exodus 10, when referencing the plague of locusts on Egypt. God says to Moses in verse 1 and 2, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may perform these signs of mine among them, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your grandson how I made a mockery of the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, that you may know that I am the Lord." So this is a good time to point out that the word mockery used here also means to swallow up. Keep that in your back pocket. God lets his enemies think that they have this great power and authority for a time, as they often can perform similar signs, but then he sends others that are similar in appearance, yet much stronger. And in the end, God always swallows them up. Exodus 7:10-12. So Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh, and so they did, just as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron threw his staff down before Pharaoh and his servants, and it turned into a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called for the wise men and the sorcerers, and they too, the soothsayer priests of Egypt, did the same with their secret arts. For each one threw down his staff, and they turned into serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Back to Joel. Verse 7. They run like warriors. They climb the wall like soldiers. And each one of them marches in line, nor do they lose their way. So if you haven't figured it out yet, it's my opinion that these verses in Joel 2 have been severely mistranslated by others who have not noticed that this is a new second army mentioned in Joel 2. So many have assumed this is actually some sort of hybrid army that was created by the enemy. However, upon further investigation in the Word, we can easily see that this is God's righteous army, which is the militarized government, the church. After the destroyer is done destroying, the church is coming as destruction from the Almighty to destroy these wicked armies. The righteous staff to swallow up the wicked. They're the rod of iron that Christ will be ruling and reigning with. Listen to this in Isaiah 30, verse 30. And the Lord will cause his voice of authority to be heard, and the descending of his arm to be seen in fierce anger, and in the flame of a consuming fire, in cloudbursts, downpour, and hailstones. The word for voice here means thunderings, cracklings. It means a multitude. You just can't make this stuff up. His word is so detailed. Look back at Joel 2:5 and how God's describing this army. With a noise or thunderings as of chariots. That's his voice. They leap about on the tops of the mountains like the crackling of a flame of fire consuming the stubble. This is him appearing with his church, his body. Now listen to this. His arm in this verse means military force, an army. It means helpers, companions. This confirms that the church is coming back as this great army, and they are coming with fierce anger to execute judgment on the wicked. Church, are you waiting for an unbiblical 7-year honeymoon in heaven? Or are you preparing for this righteous war? Get in the Word and start preparing for battle because you have a huge role to play. And it's time to armor up.